The Nintendo 3DS came out in 2011 and would have been Nintendo's last normal handheld console before the hybrid Switch would have come out about 5 or 6 years later. And of course, with a new Nintendo console being out, that meant that Pokemon would eventually make its way over to this new console. And with that, we of course got Pokemon X and Y in 2013. So Pokemon X and Y, these were the first Pokemon games on the 3DS. And it brought us to the wonderful region of Kalos. And, well, these games are going to be turning 13 this year. So, I guess it's really just to go back and take a look at how wonderful these games were. Well, X and Y were very popular for quite a few reasons. First of all, they were Pokemon. Second of all, they were actually the first 3D Pokemon games for the mainline series. Now, Pokemon had done 3D stuff before, but this was pretty much always in spin-offs. And they were also introducing a few other things to really make this generation as special as it was, such as Mega Evolutions. And of course, they also tweaked the EXP share. They also kind of tweaked the overall look of the games. Now, of course, obviously, it's not the most accepted era of Pokemon. Some have criticized X and Y for being too easy, or how some of the models look. But overall, X and Y seem to be a very popular game, and in my opinion, it has one of the best stories in the series. Unfortunately, that was kind of all we got with Kalos, at least up until Legends ZA. So, probably the biggest issue with X and Y is the fact that it took so long to really be able to have some sort of sequel or anything for it. Of course, there's also a few other things to like about this game too, such as the fact that it has one of the biggest Pokedexes in any games. In fact, the Pokedex was split into 3 parts. The new Pokemon were also really cool too. The story was really heartwarming and it has some really awesome moments. And while the game is a little too easy, and while there's not too many Pokemon introduced, overall, X and Y were really fun Pokemon games, and deserve to be remembered for what they brought into the series. And in 2014, we would see a third set of remakes with Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald were among some of the more popular Pokemon games in the series. You either started with Gold and Silver, or Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, or Diamond Pearl if you were an earlier Pokemon fan, or at least with Gen 1. It really depends on how lucky you are, but a lot of people really did love the Generation 3 parts of Pokemon, and I can see why. I had played Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald myself back in 2021, and these are really fun games. Now, I was familiar with Generation 3 with Fire and Leaf Green, but it was my first time playing those ones. So I played the remakes first, and I liked them. Omega Ruby was one of the first Pokemon games I completed, and Alpha Sapphire was one of the first Pokedexes I completed. These games really did a lot to improve on their predecessors. For instance, obviously there's the normal remake stuff, like how special attack and attack got changed depending on a type, because before then, all fire moves were special attack, but now it matters if they make contact or not. Not to mention, you also have a bunch of new Mega Evolutions. You also have some new parts for the story, such as the Delta episode, which is extremely good, and finally got us a chance to capture Deoxys in a Pokemon game, and we also got to see a Mega Rayquaza. We also get to see Groudon and Kyogre get new forms. Then there's the expanded contests and cosplay Pikachu, and expanded secret hideout stuff. And overall, OS was a really fun game to play. And well, unfortunately, this would really be the end of the Gen 6 era, as contrary to rumors that were going around at that time, a Pokemon Z would never release, making ours the final entry in the Gen 6 series that, well, was new, because everything else is kind of, well, the next games we're talking about were kind of ports. But overall, I think ORAS was a really fun era of Pokemon. I think a lot of people do like this one slightly more than X and Y, because I think it really depends on who you're asking. But overall, I did like these games. I think they introduced some really interesting mechanics into the series, and it would be awesome to see a port of these someday. Hopefully, Nintendo sees this. Of course, in 2016, Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow were re-released on 3DS. Now, obviously, some people probably might be confused on why I'm talking about these games again, because I already covered them in my first Pokemon retrospective, but I also really want to talk about these ones again, because, well, this is kind of how some people actually got to play these games, myself included. Pokemon hit its 20th anniversary in 2016, and to say that this was hyped is an understatement. There was I remember seeing a lot of videos being made about the series, about how it changed people's life, or, top 20 moments in Pokemon, or stuff like that. Now, this was a few years before I really started making content, but I remember I was starting to jot down ideas at this point. And lo and behold, Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow dropped on the 3DS, just like that. And it was a super cool way to celebrate the games. Especially since the only way to play these games was through Game Boy Advance at that point. Considering that, well, you should just probably get those instead of a regular Game Boy. But even then, those games didn't have a lot of issues when it came to saving, because the batteries eventually got so old that, they couldn't really save progress anymore. So having them on a superior console like the 3DS line was really cool. And they also celebrated it more by having these games come pre-packaged in, or at least on the code, from what I've heard, on other DS systems. I think that was really cool, and it really made celebrating its anniversary really fun. Now, obviously, these games didn't really change too much. I mean, obviously, they do have a new button layout, and some moves in Pokemon got tweaked to be different from the originals. But overall, it's essentially the same game, but I'm not really complaining, because, well, it made these games accessible for a new audience, and would have brought new people into the series, which I honestly really appreciate. Of course, later that year, we ended up getting Pokemon Sun and Pokemon Moon in November of 2016. This is kind of where Pokemon does kind of get a bit more divisive. Well, more divisive than it already was. I mean, Black and White was kind of divisive. And, well, Pokemon Diamond Pearl kind of divisive too, but yeah, that's beside the point. Sun and Moon came out in 2016 and kind of felt like a huge celebration for the series turning 20, just by all the Alola forms alone. But of course, let's talk about Sun and Moon. Well, these were absolutely amazing games. I really did love these ones. This was the second Pokemon game I got day one, Yellow being the first. I got Sun the day it dropped, and while it took a while to complete it, I really did fall in love with that game. And I was very invested in the Alola region. It was absolutely amazing being able to see everything about this game. And I do like the Alola forms. I love the new trial system, and I love the characters in this game. I think Sun and Moon are probably one of the best Pokemon games that we got. There's a few flaws with this one, though. Obviously, the fact that Pokemon Bank is only needed to transfer Pokemon is the same issue with X and Y and RS, as transferring Pokemon now includes a paid subscription. Not to mention, these Pokemon don't really even show up in the Pokedex if they're not present in the main story of the game, which kind of sucks. At least it doesn't get worse. Not to mention, this game is also kind of controversial because of all the hand holding. A lot of people really did not like how many cutscenes there were with this game, which I kind of understand, but really at the same time, it's also an RPG. You might just be playing the wrong genre if that's an issue. And I do love the post game itself, but it did feel a little lacking in some places, a little too short. But overall, I think Sun and Moon were really fun Pokemon games, and when these dropped, it made me look forward to seeing what was next from Nintendo. Of course, what was next was Gold and Silver re-releases. Gold and Silver were originally released on the Game Boy Color in 2000, and were the start of the second generation of Pokemon. And having these be ported to the 3DS was genuinely surprising. I actually did not believe this when I first heard about it. Mainly just because who would have expected that to happen? But it's a welcome change. And like Red and Blue, they did tweak a few things here and there to make them a bit more polishable. And obviously, I've already given my thoughts about these games, but I thought it was pretty cool having these games on a 3DS again. And being able to play them, it was super cool. And again, they fixed a lot of the issues with the original Gold and Silver, which I appreciate. Of course, next up is, of course, Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. There was a lot of speculation about Pokemon at this time. There were rumors about either a Switch game or a third version. Now, obviously, only one was kind of came true. In 2017, we got Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. These were enhanced versions of Pokemon Sun and Moon, and also added quite a lot of stuff. Now, these games have faced some criticism, as there's been some people that said that they didn't add enough to really justify the price. In my opinion, I think they did. Not only do you get new trials, you also get an expanded Pokédex, you get a changed story, you get a new post-game, one Elite Four members get swapped, and overall there's a new feel for the region. I kind of feel like it could be just a whole different game at this point. Now, obviously, for the most part, it has some of the same issues with Sun and Moon, such as the fact that, well, these games lag horribly. Sun and Moon was kind of notorious for lagging. Ultra Sun and Moon, let's just say if you're playing on a 2DS, good luck. But I think it was really at this point that it might have been obvious that Pokemon might have not been on a 3DS for much longer, because the same year the Nintendo Switch dropped, and the next year we would see our first Switch Pokemon games. Now, overall, I think Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon were really good Pokemon games. While these games are a little unpopular with some, I do think this was one of the best eras of Pokemon. This was the first Pokédex I've completed of any Pokemon game, and really about like 6 years later, I'm still looking back at that and thinking these games are kind of launching me on that path to complete every Pokedex. While they might not be the most popular games, I really do have a huge soft spot for them. And I'm hoping one day that we do get to go visit Alola again. Now, of course, there's one last Pokemon game. Pokemon Crystal was released in January of 2018 for the 3DS. And it's the final Pokemon game ever on the 3DS. Yeah, it's a little shocking to think about that. Now, obviously, the final new Pokemon game was obviously Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, which isn't too surprising. I mean, it's really about like 1 to 2 generations per each console before they really move on to the next one. But Pokemon Crystal it would serve as the final game on the 3DS, and at least Pokemon wise. 3DS kind of went on a lot longer than people thought. But Pokemon Crystal was a really fun game, and it was cool being able to see it on the 3DS at this point. I didn't get it day one, or even that close, to be honest. It was that July that I actually got those games. Honestly, same with Ultra Moon. Like, I didn't pick it up until like that August. Overall, I think it was a good run of Pokemon games in this part, and I was very grateful to be able to play them on a 3DS. And of course, I guess one of my thoughts on Pokemon's 3DS era, I think it was really magical. Well, this era did end right before I started making videos. I would be able to experience the Switch era in most of its entirety. But a lot of these games were some of the first ones I would have been making videos on back when I first started this channel. So it really makes it makes me feel closer to these games. And as criticized and flawed as these games are, I still love them. I can never bring myself to absolutely hate any of these Pokemon games. And I think the whole era was really awesome. I also love the content that was coming out for these games too. It really made it a special time to be a Pokemon fan. And while we'll never recover this era, we can at least look forward to more eras like this. Personally, I've been enjoying the Switch era a lot and seeing which videos come out. And I'm excited for Winds and Waves to come out. So I'm looking forward to what Pokemon has to offer next. But of course, that's all I really have for this video. Obviously, I will be back sometime soon with the final retrospective. I'm only going to be covering the first Switch and not the second one because, originally the idea was to cover ZA and its DLC, but I did a review of ZA, so there's not really much of a point to really talk about it again. And as for the DLC, I think I'm just going to simply do a video on that one to share my thoughts. When I see these retrospectives, I kind of just think about, stuff that's years old and not stuff that's months old. But obviously, I do plan to return again with that final part. So, of course, thank you all for watching, and like always, I will see you all next time.